All right, welcome everyone. We are right at 5:30 Eastern, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Sierra King and I am the Admissions and Program Services Manager at the Data Incubator, and we are a fellowship, scholarship, and placement company. We have promised you an excellent AMA panel with some of TDI's alumni from various cohorts and locations. For the first 40 minutes, I'll be asking the panelists questions, and in the last 20 minutes of the session, we will open it up to questions from the audience. Please post your questions in the Q&A section to be answered live by our panelists. Your questions can be about tips for applying to our program, how to master the coding challenge, financial aid, job placement, and program experience. We are also recording this session and we'll be sending a copy to all attendees. As a reminder, our session is an hour long today, so if we don't get to all of your questions, please email us at admissions@thedataincubator.com and we will be happy to help you. At this point, I will ask our panelists to turn on their cameras so our attendees can see you, and then we will get started with some intros. Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I know we have some very excited attendees. So I will start off by introducing our panelists, and then we will go into our AMA panel and asking some questions there. So to start things off, I will introduce Stacy Karthus. Stacy is currently a lead data scientist at Theorent in New York City. Stacy has been a member of the data science team at Theorent since April 2017, where she started as an associate data scientist. Theorent is an ad tech company that uses machine learning to optimize all aspects of real-time bidding on digital advertising campaigns. Stacy works to increase user interaction with ads by creating machine learning models to inform whether or not to bid on certain ad slots. Prior to this, Stacy was a fellow with the Data Incubator in the January 2017 cohort in New York City, and she graduated with a master's degree from Stony Brook University in physics in December of 2016. Specifically, she worked in a heavy ion nuclear physics with the Phoenix experiment, and Stacy's undergraduate degrees are in math, physics, and from the University of New Hampshire in 2014. So welcome, Stacy. We are so happy to have you here with us today. And next, I have Mark Etlinger. Mark received his PhD in linguistics from the UC Berkeley with a postdoctoral fellow in neuroscience at Northwestern University, and as a research scientist at the Department of Veterans Affairs prior to joining the Data Incubator as a student fellow in spring 2016. After the program, he worked as a director of data science for an ad tech company working on NLP and computer vision, and he then moved to working at Google 4 years as a computational linguist. Mark works on the data for the machine learning models behind the Google Assistant, heading up the data quality effort. And he serves as an AI ML NLP advisor at several startups, including Robin Healthcare, Vise, which is in fintech, and currently Personal AI. So welcome, Mark. We are very excited to have you here with us today. Next up is Adam Gifford. Adam received his PhD in neuroscience from the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied how humans perceive sound utilizing complex statistical and machine learning algorithms on behavioral and neuropsychological data. After graduating, he went on to a postdoctoral position at the University of Louisville, where he built and managed the experimental and analytics protocols for a newly formed research lab studying human cognition and action control in Parkinson's patients using single neuron and population-based analysis techniques. Adam's strong desire to use his statistical and programming skills to solve real-world problems is what led him to attend the Data Incubator's Winter 2021 Data Science Fellowship. The fellowship taught him to the industry standard tools and techniques that enabled him to make his industry transition into data science, where he is currently the principal data scientist at Behavior, a digital health startup using virtual reality to educate, motivate, and activate healthy behaviors. So welcome, Adam. We are happy to have you here with us as well. And next up is Nicola Ronchetti. Nicola received his PhD in mathematics from Stanford University in 2017. During his postdoc in number theory at UCLA, he decided to make a career change towards data science and machine learning areas that had long fascinated him for their proximity to mathematics and their far-reaching implications and use cases. Nicola was a TDI scholar in the West Coast Spring Cohort, and after the program, he joined Numerics Quant, a data-based small investment fund, as a data scientist and an analyst. Recently, Niccolo joined Square as a machine learning engineer, working with the fraud prevention team. So welcome to all of our panelists here. We are very excited to have you, and we will get started with our first question. And I'll ask them to the group, so you're welcome to answer them in any order that you feel fit, and then we'll just go from there. So our first question for the group is, tell us a little bit about your current role and briefly describe what it looks like to work at your company. And anyone can unmute themselves and go first if they'd like to.
Okay, sure, I'll start.
I'm gonna say not all at once.
Yeah. So Behavior is a startup healthcare company. I'm actually the first hire on the data science team. They obviously have some people that do some basic reportings and SQL dashboards and stuff like that. But I was sort of the first hire to really focus on increasing engagement in the product. So we have several software virtual reality products to help with emotional regulation and stress and anxiety management, a couple of informational tools for pregnant, expectant mothers. So sort of those kinds of things. And we're moving towards some other digital therapeutic cases. And we're looking for ways to increase user engagement and ultimately efficacy in these sort of digital therapeutics techniques. So right now it's still very much in flux. I wear a lot of different hats. I'm sort of working on a simple engagement project right now, but also helping to build out their reporting needs, as well as sort of doing some strategic planning for research partnerships in order to, I guess, build out and up the types of products that we can deliver and the types of metrics that we can use to evaluate engagement and efficacy. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Adam. Would anyone else like to chime in as well?
Sure. I'm Mark Etlinger, and as in Sierra's introduction, she mentioned, I work at Google, and I work on the Google Assistant, which is our version of Siri or Alexa. And I work on the team that tries to get the Google Assistant to understand, so natural language understanding, which is part of the larger effort of natural language processing. So I work on the natural language understanding side, so that when you say, turn on the lights, or set an alarm for 9 o'clock, or buy movie tickets, or ultimately, essentially, hopefully anything that a human would say, that we figure out what you mean. And as you would imagine, especially at a company like Google, this is a huge effort involving thousands of people. This larger effort is broken down into a lot of smaller components. And there's like the modeling team, which focuses on like building the models. But then I am on the data team. And so we focus on generating, finding, labeling, annotating, anything else, measuring the quality of the data that goes into these models. And then I even more granularly, which is kind of how things go, is I focus on data quality. So all the data that goes into the models, how do we measure whether it's good data? And if it's bad data, what do we do with it? So that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years. Before I worked, before this team, I was working more on the modeling side. So that was very helpful, obviously, to inform how I measure data quality. But now I'm focused on that data quality side of things.
Sounds like very interesting stuff on your end, Mark.
Let me go next, if you don't mind, Stacey. Hi, my name is Niccolo. I just very recently joined Square. Square is started off as a payment processing company. I'm sure that most of you are probably aware of it, that little white square that you see when you go and pay with your card, that's us. So we try to empower merchants throughout the world. We try to make it more accessible for every merchant, for every business to accept credit cards, to empower themselves and increase their customer base. And specifically, I'm part of the fraud prevention team, which means that we try to fight fraudsters on a daily basis, on a monthly basis. And there's lots of different projects that we work on. It's not, for example, simply credit card fraud, which is the first thing that may come to your mind. But just to give you an idea, it's also about trying to find out if merchants are really what they say they are. Is this merchant real? Does this person even exist? Are they selling, or is their activity exactly what they say it is? Now, I joined very recently, so I can't speak in detail about the kind of projects I've worked on, but let me tell you something about my previous position, like Mark did. Soon after I finished as a data incubator, I joined Numerics Quant. Numerics Quant is a very small investment fund, so overall the company was 4 to 6 people. And as you can imagine, in such a small company, and I'm sure it's exactly what Adam has described, the subdivision of roles and of a task is not really set in stone. Everyone does a little bit of everything, even if the titles may suggest otherwise. So back then, I was much more focused on data engineering, data building, new data pipelines to process new financial data, and some financial modeling as well. All right, I want to personally thank everyone who is attending this session. It's my first time being a panelist. I was on the other side of the screen, and hopefully you'll find it as enlightening and interesting as I did.
I'm sure they will, and we very appreciate everyone coming back and participating today. And I want to make sure I give Stacy the time to answer as well.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. So I'm a lead data scientist at Theorent. So Theorent is an ad tech company, as Sierra talked about. So this means that we deliver advertisements for our clients for anytime you're on the web, reading a news article, or on an app and you receive an ad. There's an auction that happens for that ad space, and my company, we bid on that ad space for our clients. And so the data science team, our role is to build predictive models to decide, is this a good, which ad that we want to serve, how much money we want to spend on that particular ad, in order to get the best performance for our clients. Performance can be something like how many clicks, or did the user click through the ad and then perform some action on the website, like fill in a survey or make a purchase or something like that. So I do a lot of the predictive modeling there for various of those KPIs. And I started out when I first joined as an associate data scientist, and I'm now a lead data scientist. That means that I lead certain projects. And yeah, that basically covers it.
Thanks, Stacy. And now, Nicola, I know you mentioned a little bit about being on the other side of the screen. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, and really everyone, all of our panelists, what made you decide to join the data incubator programs?
Sure. So as my presentation was saying, I was finishing my postdoc at UCLA, and I was working in number theory, which is a very abstract area of mathematics. And I realized at some point that it was just not enough anymore for me in terms of concrete impact, in terms of motivation. And I had been sort of like fascinated from afar about data science and ML, and I really wanted to make the jump. But you know, online, you go online, you say, oh, I want to learn machine learning, I want to learn data science, and there's like thousands and thousands of possible sources, and you get lost. It's just, who knows what's relevant, what's important, what's repeated and what not. And I wanted to have some sort of an intensive, a concrete, and a professional preparation that would allow me to switch careers, because I know it's a very it's a very competitive field and growing very fast. And that's what made me decide to join the Data Incubator.
Yeah, I had a pretty similar experience. Well, except so I was doing in a PhD program, and I sort of realized that I didn't want to be in academia, and basically I was 2 years in and just decided, this isn't for me, and wanted to do something a bit more hands-on, more impactful, because what I was doing was I was dealing with particles and collisions and physics that were just very high energy. The impact that I saw beyond my immediate physics community was pretty small. So yeah, I saw data science as a fairly logical step. And when I sort of did a little bit of surface level research on it, it seemed like, okay, this is the part of physics and the part of my research that I actually enjoy the most. So why not move on? And the Data Incubator being a sort of a stepping stone from academia to data science seemed perfect.
Yeah, I'll just echo everything that Nicola and Stacy said. The couple things that I would also add, I had a couple of colleagues in grad school and during my postdoc years that had gone through TDI, so I had some firsthand or secondhand experience of the type of quality, the quality of work that you got from it, and it seemed like it was a good breadth and also just enough depth to make you feel like you knew enough about the different techniques that were important in industry in order to make that jump. And then importantly for me, I think, was above the sort of technical skills that you learn, you also get access to their hiring network. And honestly, what I was finding was just like getting your foot in the door in different companies, like getting past the screening process with the resume. I don't think my resume was necessarily any less strong in terms of the types of things that I did just before and just after TDI, but like knowing that I put the TDI name on my resume and I was able to work through their hiring partners who have experience working with TDI alumni, it was just so much easier to get my foot in the door. And then from there it was sort of up to me, but just getting access to hiring partners I think was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And my story was a little bit different in that I did work in academia for 5 years as a research scientist. And the reason I wanted to transition was because it felt a little bit like a sort of dead end for me. Like academia was and research was not what I thought it would be. Especially living in the Bay Area, and wanting to have a life outside, making choices that were beneficial to my life at large, as opposed to just pursuing an academic track. So I knew I wanted to go to industry, but I had no idea how, and I didn't even really know what that meant. And so this was 2016. The notion of data science was just kind of becoming into common parlance. And so, did some research and discovered Data Incubator and a couple of the competitors as well. And didn't know what I would be getting, but knew that this was a step I had to take to make that transition, because I really didn't know what industry was about. And that was what the Data Incubator did. It wasn't so much, as Adam said, it wasn't so much like how much I was able to learn about doing actually data science in that certain span, but I learned about what being a data scientist actually meant. I learned about the language used in data science. So in my research, I might have some names or terminology that I would associate with certain statistical methods, and I just learned how to refer to it by the industry specific names, so that when I was doing interviews, I knew what I was talking about, but now I had the ability to sound to them like I knew what I was talking about, as opposed to using all this academic jargon, which they didn't understand at all. So it was a great way to help bridge that gap between the skills that I had and the skills that they needed, because without the data incubator, there's no way I would have been able to connect the two.
I think we hear that a lot from our students that are coming to us from academia looking to transition into industry. So I know we touched on this next question a little bit, but maybe we can go into a bit more detail and share more about your experiences at the Data Incubator and how the program and the curriculum and the services offered were instrumental in your career development. And for all panelists, if anyone would like to go first.
Sure. So I guess I can start this off. I would say I'll try and start with the things that I think maybe were less obvious at the time when I thought I was going to get out of it, and what I appreciated the most. So I liked the fact that you guys worked with Let's Eat Grandma to help you, to help everyone sort of beef up their resume and make it sort of polished, and give you like a draft of a cover letter based on like a job description that you might be interested in. Something that, you know, makes it sort of look polished, but then also will work through all of the, pre-screened, algorithms for putting in certain terms and how the format of the document should look like in order to get through those automatic screening things. So that was definitely really helpful for me, I thought. And I also enjoyed, we had these weekly code review sessions that were based on the weekly projects, mini projects that we worked on, where you got to see, what your goal for that sort of sub part of the task was, as well as some solutions that different students put in anonymously. So you got to see what they did, what looked good, what looked bad, and ways to improve it. So you get to sort of have some real concrete examples of, I guess the do's and don'ts in sort of Python programming and stuff. And I liked sort of the, I guess you got sort of all aspects of what you might need for being a data scientist, from, data wrangling to different machine learning techniques to data visualization and sort of the psychology about what makes a good visualization versus not. And all the way up through sort of serving your model in some sort of app or deployment. So I think those were sort of the main highlights for me.
Yeah, I learned a ton about machine learning models and algorithms that I just hadn't seen before. And so I think that was really helpful. I also think just knowing what to expect when you go into an interview, I think that was a huge thing that I learned, because I would have had no idea. And I think I would have had to be learning on the fly if I had tried to do it, try to get a job outside of a Data Incubator. And just the access to employers was also obviously huge, since I'm still at the first job that I had outside of Data Incubator, and I don't think that they would have seen my resume if it hadn't been going through Data Incubator. Either 4 or 5 of us in my data science team actually came from the Data Incubator. So that tells you a lot about how much, my company in particular values Data Incubator alumni.
Yeah, that's very awesome to hear.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just be quick, because I mentioned some of it in my previous answer, but the last thing was sort of the way to think about statistics and statistical analyses. Coming from research, you kind of use statistics to try to sort of understand, whether a hypothesis is true or not, at least the way that I was using it. Whereas, data science uses statistics for a very different purpose. At Google as well. Like, I have not done a null null hypothesis significance test in my year, 4 years of work. And yet I'm using statistics all the time. So kind of that helping with that like switch in mindset of like how you use these algorithms, these mathematical methods was very valuable as well.
I echo what everybody said. I'm very close to Stacy in terms of the most important part of the program for me. I learned really a ton of stuff. I don't think I would have been able to learn as much in 8 weeks if I had to do it myself. The access to the partners was extremely helpful. I especially honestly like the weekly mini projects, because the way I learn is really by doing stuff, and the fact that the weekly mini projects was challenging but not impossible and linked to my I'm not sure if it is the case, they are linked to access to the partners, so that was even more motivational even when I was struggling. And then everyone in my cohort, it was a small one because we were the first cohort to go completely remote because of COVID. Everyone in my cohort was supportive, available. Yeah, beautiful experience.
So what would you say, and I think we also touched on this in this question as well, but your favorite parts of participating in the program?
Honestly, I really enjoyed the social component. It was great to get to know a whole bunch of other nerdy PhDs and hang out with them. The coding interview practice was useful. For better or for worse, they do these bizarre coding interviews to assess how good of an engineer you are, and even though it's a completely different skill set. So just iterating over that, daily, just practicing. That it's really just about practice. And it's hard to force yourself to do that on your own because it's not the most inspiring stuff. So that was valuable, and it was fun. We made it fun. Like we turned it into a competition, and we tried to see who could finish it the fastest, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have a favorite part of the program? I will say the individuals participating online may not have had the same social component that you had, Mark, but I think we've done a pretty good job of translating the program as it was in person online. But maybe Adam and Nicola, you can talk a little bit how it was virtually for you.
So mine was fully remote. I'm not sure if Nicola's was full remote or they transitioned to it, but I would definitely say the social aspect was a challenge. Like we had some pre-planned weekly sort of social hours, which in all honesty seemed unsuccessful, at least for me. I don't think I attended much, but they did try. It's just hard. It's something that like I would just have issue being social if I'm not in face-to-face. So it was probably more to do with me than other people's desire to be social. But I think all things being considered, the remote class was I think just as effective as I would have hoped for, versus being in person. I think the lectures are still live. You still have the ability to virtually interact with your mentors and the instructors to ask questions and go through the material. We only had some minor technical difficulties with internet stuff. So, I think for the most part, I could have been, in a classroom, and I don't think I would have gotten much more out of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to double down to what Adam said. Again, as I said, we were the first cohort to go completely online, but when I enrolled in the program, we were still supposed to be in New York City in spring 2020 in person. So I had to make the decision about whether, transitioning from in-person to remote was okay for me. And I must say, I was doubtful because part of my job as a postdoc was to teach. And I had to teach a few classes online, and it was not good. So I was skeptical, but honestly, it exceeded expectations. And I think this is because the TDI already had some experience with teaching remotely. so I agree with Adam that the social component was a struggle. Honestly, I don't think we even had some pre-planned social. We tried in between us, but typically was like 2 or 3 people. But everyone was available at basically every reasonable hour. So yeah. And my favorite part of the program was really the sort of like the learning part. So the lecture and the assignments and the mini projects, definitely my most interesting part for me.
I'll just quickly echo that, that I enjoyed the lectures, and I also, well, yeah, I don't know if they would be remote or in person in the future, but being in person, I enjoyed being able to, work through problems with my peers in the cohort, and I thought that it was really helpful that my peers were there the whole day, that we could work on mini projects, and then when we had issues, we could talk directly to the lecturer, at least some of the time, and I just thought that was really helpful, and I enjoyed that.
We still have our virtual social hours, and I think a change from when Adam and Nicola were in the program, we now have weekly study group sessions where everyone in the cohort can get together and study virtually after the lectures. So to really still do our best virtually to foster that collaborative environment. So I know
that's good to know. That was actually going to be the one thing I jumped in on. I did not necessarily have an issue with it, but it was harder to reach out to your fellows to get help with things when you're remote. You kind of have to send a Slack message, hope they see it, and then see if you can schedule a time. So that is just, practically much more difficult than everyone being in the same room together or something where you can sort of just, tap the person's shoulder. But it sounds like that is getting better too with the weekly study sessions as well. So that's great.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about TDI. After each cohort, we survey all of our students, and that was one of the big takeaways, that we wanted weekly study sessions where everyone can get together and work through assignments or go over mini projects or just talk about the lectures. So in addition to those virtual social events, they'll have time in our upcoming cohorts, and actually even in our current cohort, to participate weekly and study together. So I know we talked a little bit about your favorite things. Why don't we talk a bit about what you found to be most challenging in the program?
One of the things that I personally found difficult was understanding the relationship between what I was doing in the course and how that would potentially help me get a job with the partners. And I guess, it seemed like it mattered a lot, but I think in the end, it didn't necessarily matter. And so, I guess understanding that wasn't coupled together, I think would have been beneficial. And really, that would have allowed me to just really focus on, getting out of the program what I could, and then kind of separating that from then trying to find opportunities with partners, as opposed to feeling like, oh, if my capstone project is really awesome, that will get me a job. So that part was a bit challenging.
So I guess my most challenging thing was a little unrelated to the program. So, well, it was in New York, and I did it in person, and I was living an 1.5 to 2 hour train ride away. And so the intensity of the program being like an all day thing and having homework outside of that, it made the program that much more intense for me, because I had even less time just because of the commute. Yeah, and I guess I kind of echo with the capstone. It felt like it was a lot of work for something that may not have. It was helpful to have a project that was a full project, but I think it did seem like it would be a little bit more helpful with the job search. But than it really was.
Any other thoughts?
For me, the most challenging part was also the intensity of the program, and I was not commuting, but still, it's a sort of like full-time student, and then you have the mini projects, and then you have the capstone that there are certain days where you are planning to work on your capstone, but then there's a lecture and you have to catch up what happened on lecture, and there's a mini project and you're behind, and then you have to ask for help. And the capstone, and on top of it, you're applying for jobs. So you have to write these cover letters, which at the beginning, it's a struggle because what am I even saying here? Why don't you just look at my resume? And then scheduling interviews. So the intensity, definitely. But contrary to what Stacy and Mark said, I must say I found the capstone experience very important because it really taught me what a full project end-to-end is. And it's not simply about, grabbing this data set from Kaggle and then building a model and tweaking it with like basically almost a pre-made notebook that you have to fine tune. There were other parts, the data cleaning, the feature engineering, and then there's a mess that you have to sort out that I found very helpful in the job search, especially during interviews. They will ask you, what project have you worked on? And having the capstone as something to present and presenting the challenges that you solved throughout working on a capstone was, for me at least, very, very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nicolo. Outside of it just being that additional training, having it as a portfolio piece to speak about in future future interviews as well.
So something Nicolo said remind me of something else that was really hard, which was the volume of rejections or no responses that you get when applying for jobs. My previous career path had involved me applying to 8 grad schools, 2 postdocs, and 1 job. I just got the job as a research scientist through a connection. And in the data incubator, you apply for dozens. I was applying for dozens and dozens of jobs, and oftentimes hearing nothing, getting some rejections, having some interviews and not making it. And so you have to get used to like a volume of rejection that you might not have experienced in your academic career up to that point.
I think it's definitely helpful having our placement and recruitment manager teams because they really help our students prep and prepare for the volume and all the different interviews that you'll be taking while you're in the program. And then also just helping you prepare with notes if they have from previous interviews and getting you through that process as well. But definitely, I think as you're applying for roles, you will have lots of interviews, you'll have lots of applications, and our team really does our best to make sure that those hiring partners are getting back to you. But it does take time. It's not an immediate process once you go through the program.
Absolutely. There's just a part of it that's just a numbers game. You just have to,
And just to piggyback onto what Mark was saying, in addition to it just being a crapshoot in terms of getting back, and this also ties back to what I found the most difficult is you could literally be asked almost anything in a data science interview. And so just figuring out what the best things to prepare for, like what questions do you expect to get from a marketing and analytics company versus a Google or a healthcare or fintech company. And for someone like me, I was like, I don't necessarily care what industry I want to be in, and so I kind of wanted to just see what was out there. So but then even within it, it depends on what kind of problems they're interested in. If they're interested in natural language processing or computer vision or deep learning or whatever. So trying to be strategic about what I'm going to focus on and sort of review for this particular interview, which could be entirely different from the things that I want to focus on for another interview. And there's just like a ton of, you have coding concepts, you have sort of basic data science project management, you have like, sort of brain teaser games, you have like statistics questions, like, it is a sea to navigate. And it's, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt that like you will go into many interviews and just be like, totally unprepared, no matter how much you actually prepared for it. And that's just sort of what it is.
Well, just to going back, since we're on this topic, if you have any advice looking back as you applied for the program that you would have told yourself, what would you tell this group of new applicants?
Sorry, for applying to the program or for after?
So before applying to the program, do you have any advice that you would give these applicants that are currently in the same place that you were at one point?
Sure. So I kind of had the benefit of having applied to the data incubator a few times. So I kind of knew what was being asked and sort of the technical challenge stuff. It's definitely helpful to have a sort of strong idea for a capstone project. You don't necessarily have to have a ton of work done in it, but I feel like I spent probably, the couple weeks before I, logged in to take the technical challenge, which is like once you start it, you have 72 hours, so you kind of have to get through it. Probably the 2 weeks leading up to knowing when I had to start it, making sure that like I picked a project that I was going to be interested in, so it's going to keep me focused throughout the 8-week period. I can create a story that develops some sort of strong business case for the project. I knew where I was going to get my data from. I knew how to do, I was able to, load it in, do some preliminary pre-processing and exploratory analyses to show that there is something there with the project idea that I wanted. Because, once you start that technical challenge, you have 72 hours to submit, basically everything. And I can't say that, if I had less work done, I wouldn't have gotten in, but it would have definitely been a struggle during the program to, catch up. So as much as you can get through, sort of the basic starting points of picking a good project and doing some basic analyses that will convince you and, TDI that there's something interesting there, is super helpful.
Anyone else?
I guess the advice I would give is similar to the advice for applying for jobs afterwards, which is try to figure out what thing distinguishes you from all the others, because there are now lots of PhDs with like data science chops, right? There's an excess of PhDs being generated out of academia and not enough tenure track jobs for them. So there's a lot of people looking into industry. And so you have to figure out how to differentiate yourself from everyone else. And that ideally would be some sort of specialization in terms of your what knowledge you have. So, as Adam was talking about, when you're putting together your proposed capstone, what skills or knowledge or passion do you have that might be different than everyone else that will make your capstone stand out from everyone else's that's kind of interesting. That's not the same like analysis of Twitter data, for financial markets that everyone else is doing. And similarly, like when you're applying for jobs, what is it that distinguishes you from your cohort, or from, people who didn't go through the data incubator, that will make you stand out. It might not necessarily work for some of the jobs you apply for, because they might not want that skill, but eventually, hopefully you'll find a match between, again, what makes you different or special from other people.
Stacy or Nicola?
I would probably just be parroting what Adam said about the project. I think that was something that I wish I had spent a little bit more time on before applying. And just realizing through the application process that it was a big deal in terms of getting into the program. So.
Well, I want to make sure we leave enough time to get to the Q&A section. We have a couple questions in there. So I will pull that up and just read the questions and anyone can answer these. So the first one we have in there, it says, after completing the cohort, does the background you have factor into getting employment? Did they require a new job must be related to your major in addition to TDI data science certificate?
That's a great question. I think it might vary amongst us, but for me, 100%. Like that was very, very important.
Yeah, there are certain jobs in my experience that still look at your title. My first position at Numerics, they only hire PhDs. That said, I think most of the time, as Adam said before, once you get your foot in the door, it's up to you. Once you get an initial interview screen, you will not be rejected because you have a master as opposed to a PhD if you play your cards very well.
I agree. I know mine definitely helped me get a foot in the door, especially since there are people at my company that did similar work. That was sort of something that we could relate to, which I think was helpful to just get me in, and he knew what it took to do the work that I was doing previously. However, we've since hired people that don't have the same background. We've hired non-masters, non-PhD. So yes, it helps get the foot in the door, certainly, but as the others have said, it's really what you can offer after you get your foot in the door. That's most important.
Another question here is, how did your TDI experience translate into your first role after finishing the fellowship? And were you hired through a TDI hiring partner? The answer to the second question is yes for everyone, but if anyone wants to elaborate on the first part.
I think the thing that I was talking about earlier in terms of like a different way of thinking about statistics and statistical analysis, that has continued, even many years later, has continued to be like a kind of key sort of paradigm shift in my mind that sort of I got out of the data incubator.
For me, definitely.
I guess I would. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Definitely because prior to the TDI, I was not really coding much. Maybe every once in a while, and the TDI really improved my coding a lot, and especially gave me the tools that I ended up using in my next job. Basically, Python, Pandas, and scikit-learn is what you end up doing 80% of the time. So that's how what I did at TDI connected with my next role.
Yeah, and then I was just going to say, in addition to the practical technical skills, I think my mentor in particular for my capstone, but also all of the instructors, really harped on understanding like, what is the business value of your capstone project? Like, what is the importance of the work that you're doing? Like, why should anyone that is a non-scientist or, data person care? Being able to tell the story and being able to, from a generic problem of, my employer wants to increase engagement in their, software programs. What does that actually mean in terms of implementing a model that can actually help improve engagement in some way? Like, what are the particular ways that you can actually implement a model to help with that or answer those questions? Being able to ask the right questions and get the right form of the problem in a way that you can actually solve it.
All right, and next question here in our Q&A is, it's just coming from a SWE background matter a lot in completing the TDI program, or does coming from a research PhD background contribute a lot to having it easier in the TDI program?
I think the focus, obviously there's a big focus on coding, but I wasn't strong, and I still don't think I'm a particularly strong coder. And some people like cruise through things a lot quicker than I could. but even with a minimal coding background, you can still make it through. And then having other skills was valuable as well. So there were some units that were focused more on the stats side of things, and that was kind of more my area of expertise. So my colleagues were asking me a lot of questions that 1 week. And then like on language, I think we had a unit on like processing language data, and like so everyone was asking me questions. But you can come in with none of those and still make it through the program. It just you have to spend a little more time.
Another one here. Sorry, go ahead, Stacey.
I was just going to say similarly, I didn't know Python. I taught myself Python right before the data incubator program, though I had plenty of years of software experience. It was software experience from you need to use these tools to do physics perspective. So I would say it's very helpful, definitely, to have some software background, and that makes that part of it easier. But obviously, the other, statistics skills and are extremely useful and just as necessary.
Yeah, another question here. How did you choose your capstone project, and how much support or help on the project do you get during the program?
Okay, so I chose my project after doing a little search on, I think, TDI's website for information about past projects. I did a little bit of research through, I think, the other fellowship program, Insight Fellows, had some stuff. So I basically looked at previous capstone projects to get some sort of ideas for what example projects would be. And then I sort of thought of, I wanted to, I have a neuroscience background, so let me think of something in sort of healthcare space. And that sort of led me through to research or work on a ICU intensive care unit stays database that I ended up using for my capstone project. So that's sort of how I thought about it. And, there was a huge sort of use case in terms of the cost of managing ICUs. And so that's really what I did. And I would say in terms of getting support, you can get as much support as you ask for. So the first day of the cohort, I messaged my would-be mentor for the capstone, and I was like, tell me how I should plan out my next 8 weeks, because I don't know I don't know how I'm gonna do everything together. We would have weekly sessions where we would meet in bigger groups and small groups to go over different aspects. But at least my mentor was always there, just to Slack chat away if I had a question and needed to jump on a Zoom call. So within reason, as much help or support as you need, they can provide you. And I would say get as much as you need.
And then I want to take this last question in here, and I think we covered this a bit in the session, but how long did it take you to get your first job after completing the program?
I got my offer about a month and a half after the end of the program. However, that being said, my final interview for that job, my third round interview for that job, was the last week of the week after the program ended. And then I had a final phone interview with the VP of data science a couple of weeks later. And so it just took them a little while to make a decision, it seemed like. But
it took me a while longer. I think it took me about 4 or 5 months. So definitely don't be disheartened, if it doesn't click. I think a lot of people got very frustrated at the beginning because, again, a lot of us had not had experience of the real world job hunt. And people did get discouraged. But then if you have friends outside of academia, or you meet later, and like that's actually pretty typical to look for to find a new job. It takes months.
Yeah, to be
Yeah,
fair.
I got mine about 2 weeks.
Maybe that's just me.
No, to be fair, my first interview for my current job was the second week of the program. So it did take 2.5, months, and I was getting a lot of rejections. So this was my only offer. I'll be clear about that.
I actually got an offer during the program, but because of some visa issues, I couldn't end up taking it. So I actually took my first job 2 months after the program has ended. And I want to echo what Mark has already said. A bunch of times this point that you really are playing a numbers game, and you'll get plenty of rejections. Now, I was used to it from academia because when I applied for a postdoc, I think I applied to like 100 postdocs because I really needed to get a job and I didn't care where. So get used to it. You'll get rejections. You'll get rejections before the first round, after the first round, after the second round. It doesn't matter. Think of it as a pyramid. If you try enough pyramids, at some point you'll get on top of it. And yeah, just don't get discouraged. At some point, something will click. And one more thing I want to say. I'm sorry, maybe I'm rambling. The interviews actually make you better. As you do interviews, you will realize that maybe they tend to ask similar questions. Sometimes if you do enough interviews, you'll even get the same coding challenge, literally the same, because there's like 20 of them and everyone asks the same 20 ones. So just keep going.
And another great thing about the program is you can get, if you're applying in our hiring partner network, you can get feedback on your interviews. So you can always reach out to the PRMs, and if you get that rejection, just ask, do they have any feedback for me, or what could I have done differently? And you get these post-interview forms that you'll fill out after each interview, and it really helps us get a better understanding of how it went and help you prepare for the next one. So if you feel like it wasn't that successful, you can prepare and do better the next time. And I think that is our last question in the Q&A box. We have time for maybe one more if anyone else wants to squeeze one in there. Going once. Going twice.
I'm sorry, I want to say something about still the job hunt, which I'm sure, it's basically maybe the main reason why we're all here. So when you are then the job hunt, you're playing a numbers game, but I do want to encourage you not to settle for anything. You don't want to look for the job of your dreams because you most likely you're not going to get it on your first job out of academia. But you also want to make sure that you're asking the right questions, make sure that in some sense you feel like that job could be good for you. You feel like you could be a good fit for the job. And this is something that I was told during TDI, but maybe I didn't pay enough attention to. So maybe it's something I wish I could have told myself from a year ago. I think an excellent question to ask is sort of like pin down the kind of projects, the kind of problems that they work on at that company. Because you might think, oh, like I know what the marketing space is about. But then you get there and the day-to-day work, it may not be what you think it is. And you really want to pin it down. So ask the people that interview you, what are you actually working on right now? What do you do with your time? Sorry.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to take some time to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. I know that our incoming students are very appreciative of your answers to their questions. I know they have a lot of questions there. So just a reminder for our applicants, the deadline to submit your application, if you haven't already, is July 9th. And then also, if you want to be included in our early admissions application pool, you'll want to complete your coding challenge by July 12th. Again, thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.